Oh, hi.
So we're getting started this week with Currant Buns, an English tea staple, which we'll do in 3 different flavors because raisins aren't really my favorite. I decided to try fresh currant since I had some frozen ones, dried currant with cinnamon, and chocolate chip. When it comes to dessert flavors, for River, there's only chocolate. I'm not going to talk you through attempt 1 of this recipe because the prevailing visual lesson here should be that if you're going to bake something using a recipe which measures out the flour by volume and not by weight, be forewarned that you'll have to roll with the punches and adjust the formula until you achieve the consistency that you desire. And that's exactly what happened when I tried the Currant Buns recipe from the Titanic book.
I ended up having to overcompensate with extra flour and then extra sugar and like other things, and it was no longer a recipe that I was teaching you guys how to make. So
I tried it a second time and I weighed out the ingredients as I added extra flour until I achieved a formula that I think will probably work for anyone who wants to try this recipe after watching this video. So here's the actual recipe, adjusted to provide the flour by weight. To a 1/4 cup of warm water, add 1 tablespoon of yeast. Sprinkle a little bit of sugar over and then mix. Those yeasties are sticky little bastards, so you'll probably need to use 2 spoons and scrape things a little bit. Next, mix the dry ingredients together. The overall weight that I used in this recipe is 580 grams, but I added 500 here and 80 later because 500 grams was an educated guess at the time based on my last attempt at this recipe. To the flour, add a 1/2 cup of sugar and then a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Mix the dry ingredients together and then make a well in the center, or don't, and pour in a 1/4 cup of melted unsalted butter and 3/4 of a cup of warm milk. Add in the yeast liquid mixture and then mix these ingredients to hydrate the flour, and then put a lid on and wait about 10 minutes for it to autolyze, which is a fancy way of saying you're giving the flour time to absorb the liquid you've added. Add in the eggs one at a time and mix by hand to combine. It was at this point that I added that extra 80 grams of flour because things were feeling a bit wet, but I suggest you add that at the beginning, and then if you need to add a little flour later, go for it. You're doing this by feel. Once things are looking combined enough, turn the dough onto a floured work surface and continue kneading and mixing as best you can. This is a sticky dough, and you sort of want to keep it that way. I'm trying not to add too much flour because the higher the dough hydration, the more moist, open, and tender the crumb of the buns will be after rising and baking. A drier dough will produce a drier end result. Once you've got a nice gluten development going, which means the dough stretches out with visible strands holding it together, you pick it up with the help of your trusty bench scraper and put it into an oiled bowl so it doesn't stick to the bowl when you try to take it out later. Cover the bowl and wait until the dough has risen to double its size. Don't stress too much about the temperature. If your house is cold, it'll just take longer. At this stage of bulk fermentation is about developing flavor, so a longer, slower fermentation is totally fine, if not desirable. Once the dough has risen, turn it onto a floured work surface. Punch it down to degas the dough and then stretch it out into a flat type shape before spreading the fillings over top. Fold the dough over on top of the fillings and then knead until things are properly incorporated, reincorporating bits of filling if they fall out. Once things are properly distributed, cut the dough into even pieces using the bench scraper and then shape the pieces into balls, wrapping the dough around and then pinching at the bottom to establish surface tension so the bun will rise nice and round. Once you've fondled your balls, put them onto a baking tray lined with parchment. Cover using something that won't touch the top of the buns. I'm using a big roasting pan that fits over my sheet tray, and let the buns rise. They won't double in size here, but you're probably going for something more like a 50 to 75% growth, but you can use a floured finger to poke one and test to see if it's proved. If it is proved, the dent you've made with your finger will stay there, and then slowly spring back but not fully. Warm up your oven to 350 while you brush the buns with a mixture of icing sugar and water or a beaten egg so that they turn out glossy. And then bake them until golden brown, rotating the trays top to bottom, back to front to ensure even browning. My buns baked for about 12 minutes in total, and I flipped around the 6-minute mark, but it might not exactly shake out that way for you, so roll with the punches. Take out the buns and serve them warm. The next day, they can be eaten cold or reheated in a microwave for 30 seconds or so to warm them up and get them good and moist again. I hope you give this a try. This is basically a sweet bun template recipe that you could almost use for anything. You could add cheese to this dough and make cheese buns, or you could totally use this as a hamburger bun recipe with no fillings, which I plan to try next time, with maybe some sesame seeds and an egg wash on top. Stay adaptable, my friends. You never know when you might hit an iceberg.
My own dough, please. My own dough,